Hey everyone, Hatfield15 here, and as promised in the final episode of my Let's Play series on Metroid Dread, I'm here today to give my review of what was likely one of the best games I've played in a long time. This review will be divided into three main topics: the game's storyline and how it impacts the overall lore of Metroid, the gameplay with its environments and abilities, as well as its improvements and drawbacks, and finally, the E.M.M.I robots that put the dread in Metroid Dread. I will warn those of you watching this video that there will be some spoilers ahead, so if you want to play the game and have everything as a surprise, please leave the video now and come back afterwards. So without further ado, let's begin. Like many dedicated Metroid fans, I had a lot of questions going in, because the first volume of the Metroid Dread report stated that, quote, "This entry marks the end of a story arc focusing on the strange, interconnected fates of Samus Aran and the Metroids," and as more volumes came out, fans were asking a lot of questions. I even made a theory video a couple weeks after the reveal trailer's release talking about some theories I had at the time. How will the story end? What did the Chozo and the E.M.M.I have to do with all of it? Well, strap in, because this is gonna be a wild ride. Once again, there are some major spoilers ahead, so this is your last chance to turn back if you don't want that. Metroid Dread's story begins sometime after the events of Metroid Fusion, which was released in 2002. To briefly sum up that game, Samus gets infected by the X parasite, a deadly organism that is capable of copying its host's DNA, memories, and physical form. Her life is saved by a vaccine created from the DNA of the X's one predator, Metroids, the titular creature of the franchise. As a result of the operation, Samus is now the only being in the universe immune to the X. She then proceeds to battle the parasites in many powerful forms on board a research station overrun by them. One of those forms being the SA-X, a copy of Samus at her full power, a being that terrified 15-year-old me when I played Fusion for the first time. In the end of the game, she succeeds in sending the X to extinction by setting the research station on a collision course with planet SR-388, the homeworld of the X, and previously the Metroids who kept their population in check before they were exterminated by Samus in a previous game. The recap of Fusion shown in the prologue is accompanied by a series of lovely visuals to tell the tale. There are also brief descriptions about the X and Metroids and how their existences affected the story, so fans who are new to the series aren't missing out on too much of the lore. Further recaps of the franchise's story are shown later on in the game, which helps catch newcomers up to speed. Anyways, Dread itself begins with the Galactic Federation receiving footage from a distant planet named ZDR, showing that the X had somehow survived extinction. To safely confirm if they still lived, the Federation sends a team of 7 extraplanetary multiform mobile identifiers, or E.M.M.I robots, to the planet. Contact is lost not long after their arrival, so Samus and Adam, her AI companion who was the disembodied consciousness of her late commanding officer and father figure Adam Malkovich, are sent to investigate. Upon arrival, Samus takes an elevator to a very deep part of ZDR, where she comes face to face with something that shocked more experienced fans like myself: a living Chozo. Very basically, the Chozo are a race of bird-like aliens who created the Metroid species and gave Samus her iconic power suit. This was incredible, as we have never seen a live Chozo in any of the previous games, merely the remnants of their civilization scattered across the many planets that Samus journeys to. The Chozo attacks Samus and overwhelms her, but decides to spare her instead of killing her right then and there. She comes to a short time later to find herself stripped of a lot of her abilities, yet again. She uplinks to Adam at a nearby network station, where he notes that the attack resulted in dramatic physical changes within Samus. Being in the state she is, Adam issues the objective of returning to Samus' ship, which is all the way at the surface. By the way, it's worth noting that Adam merely gives us briefings in each area of ZDR and leaves us to do our own thing for once, rather than tell us exactly where to go. This, I feel, allows for a more classic Metroid experience, unlike with Fusion and Other M, where we have to figure out where to go next ourselves. So, we're the ones in charge for once, Adam. Suck it! As we begin our journey, we encounter 2 of the E.M.M.I robots who have become hostile for reasons yet to be revealed. After narrowly escaping them with our lives, Adam makes the assumption that they must have been hacked and that all E.M.M.I are hostile as a result. He then explains just how lethal the mechanical fiends are, which I'll elaborate on later in this video. The journey to the surface continues from there, with Samus recovering more of her abilities, battling the monsters lurking in the caves of ZDR, and avoiding the E.M.M.I at all costs. Later on, Samus reaches an area not too far from the surface of ZDR. Here we are introduced to a second Chozo figure who narrowly saves our skin by shutting down all remaining E.M.M.I robots. This one identifies himself as Quiet Robe and appears before us in a more docile manner than the one we met at the beginning, who was revealed to be named Ravenbeak. During the scene, a lot is revealed about some of the mysteries surrounding the secret artwork you can unlock in Metroid Samus Returns, specifically the last two where it shows Ravenbeak killing the Chozo survivors on SR388 after they contain the Metroids. Quiet Robe tells us that Ravenbeak plans to use the Metroids to conquer the galaxy, much like the space pirates who later try to steal that idea from his agenda unknowingly. Quiet Robe is spared and brought back to ZDR because his tribe possessed the ability to control the Metroids. One thing I question about this is, why did Ravenbeak spare only one member of the tribe? Because if they had the power to control the Metroids, then wouldn't he benefit from having more than one survivor as opposed to killing all but one? Regardless, a big wrench got thrown in their plans when one of the Chozo soldiers under Raven's command turned out to be an X-parasite in disguise. Shit hit the fan and everyone but Quiet Robe and Ravenbeak became infected. The X were eventually contained and plans were set to resume, only to find that an even bigger wrench had been thrown in. The fact that Samus eradicated the Metroid species on SR388 in Metroid Samus Returns. Not to mention that we literally nuked the planet afterwards. When all seemed lost for Ravenbeak, he learned that there was still one more way to achieve his goals of galactic conquest. The solution lay within the last Metroid itself, Samus. It is then revealed that the footage was sent to the Federation to lure us into a trap so that the E.M.M.I could be used to extract the Metroid DNA from within Samus, thus allowing Ravenbeak to revive the species once more. Samus vows to put an end to the threat of the Metroid species once and for all before resuming her mission to reach the surface and to stop Ravenbeak. I happen to find this scene very intriguing, as we now know what happened in the aforementioned Chozo memories, and that the bird people who made Samus who she is are now the enemy. The Chozo, much like the Federation, have never been antagonists at any point throughout the series, with the exception of the corrupted spirits that we fought in Metroid Prime. So the idea of a rogue faction of Chozo who go against the mild-mannered and peaceful traditions of their species is an amusing concept to say the least. That being said, I feel as though this is very fitting for the end of a story arc more than 35 years in the making that started with the OG Metroid game in 1986. Because with the space pirates, Metroids, and X all gone, what other evil force would there be for us to fight without introducing a new one right out of the blue? As the trek continues, Samus wanders into a sort of quarantine zone meant to seal something away. That something happens to be none other than the X-Parasite, thus proving that the footage sent to the Federation was legitimate, and the scourge Samus fought to eradicate in Fusion has indeed evaded annihilation. As a result of our curiosity, the X are able to escape containment and proceed to run amok on ZDR, infecting everything in sight. From there, every enemy we encounter, from the smaller enemies to the bosses, are now X-hosts. This also marks the return of a mechanic in Fusion where Samus could absorb free-floating X and recover health and ammunition after defeating an infected creature. Around this point in the game, Adam begins to question why we were spared during our initial encounter with Ravenbeak. Sure, it could be that he needs the Metroid DNA within Samus's body, but Adam feels that something else must have motivated him. I too found myself beginning to question his motives as well, because he could have just taken what he wanted right then and there, but it's likely that Ravenbeak didn't have the means to do so, thus relying on the E.M.M.I to get it for him. Another thing I pondered on was the X's motives, aside from just reproducing and infecting more hosts. After Quiet Robe was infected and revived by one of the parasites, the first thing they did was reactivate the E.M.M.I. It got me thinking, what reasons did the X have for doing so? It could easily be that they want to get rid of Samus because of her ability to absorb them thanks to her Metroid DNA. This is the most likely explanation because in Metroid Fusion, the X tried to destroy the entire BSL research station in an attempt to kill her. However, what they might fail to realize is that in doing so, they've opened up the possibility of their predators being revived, so not only could Ravenbeak use the Metroids to subjugate galactic civilization, but also permanently rid the galaxy of the X-Parasites. After finally reaching the surface of ZDR, Samus feels an urge to absorb energy from enemies as her left arm glows from time to time. Adam confirms that this strange new ability stems from the Metroid DNA in her body fully awakening. With all 7 E.M.M.I units terminated and all of her upgrades acquired, the only issue left aside from the X is Ravenbeak. To put an end to the threat of the Metroids for good. For good. For good this time. We track him to a fortress in the sky where Adam talks about Samus's genetic nature, suggesting the presence of Mockin DNA and that Samus is transforming into a Metroid. It is also revealed that Metroids were programmed to be hostile towards the Mockin, revealing the reason that Samus blacked out in the beginning, aside from being choked. Here it is revealed that Ravenbeak has been impersonating Adam the entire time. But the real bombshell here is, Samus possesses Ravenbeak's DNA, meaning that he is, in a weird sense, her father. The two of them duel, but it isn't long before Raven gets the upper hand once again. Upon witnessing Samus's power, Ravenbeak decides it's not worth extracting the Metroid DNA in his supposed daughter. Instead, as Samus dies, he plots to clone her, the most powerful Metroid in the universe. Then, her metamorphosis completes as she goes absolutely berserk on Ravenbeak, donning a suit that makes her a Metroid. And no, that is not a metaphor. The sheer magnitude of Samus's rage causes the fortress to come crashing down. Both of them survive, only for Ravenbeak to suddenly become infected by an X, which causes him to mutate into an eldritch abomination that is clapped in a few seconds with the Hyper Beam. As much as I enjoyed the encounter with Ravenbeak X, I kind of feel like the battle could have gone on for a few minutes longer, as if it could have been its own boss fight rather than an interactive cutscene. The reason why is because I feel this would be a more intense final battle between the Metroids and the X, but that's just my opinion. The defeat of Ravenbeak forces Samus to make a run for her ship as the planet begins to collapse. Now, I'm curious as to why exactly this happens, because there is no explicit reason for ZDR to self-destruct. My best guess is because of the thermal fuel system in Cataris, which is the second lowest area in the game. The planet is powered by a thermal energy routed from that area, and earlier we fought a boss who obstructed that machinery, so maybe the fortress's impact caused a chain reaction in the already damaged system? Samus finds herself unable to use her ship as her Metroid powers are out of control. Luckily, Quiet happens to be in her ship. And just how did he get inside? He then reverts to the X's gelatinous form and lets himself get absorbed by Samus, with the Thoha DNA allowing her to get her powers under control so she can leave ZDR before it explodes, permanently eradicating the X and destroying all traces of the Mockin tribe and Ravenbeak. It was mentioned that the Chozo genes she already have only slowed down her transformation rather than give her any sort of control over her energy leeching ability. Post-game, I learned that obtaining all pickups in each area of ZDR unlocked some Chozo archives, answering some of the questions that I thought would go unanswered. Now, there are still some questions that aren't even answered with these archives, which I mentioned earlier. One big thing that confuses me is Ravenbeak's motives. I feel that they're kind of misguided, not only in sparing only one Thoha for his plans, but releasing the X. Why would he release the parasites that forced him to put aside his prior intentions with the Metroids? What did he hope to accomplish in doing so? Not to mention how it ultimately backfired on him in the end. Now, what's next for Metroid's storyline? Well, nothing. As I said in the beginning, this game marks the end of the story for Samus, so making a game that comes after Dread wouldn't make any sense, namely due to the fact that all of Samus's foes are gone as of Dread's ending. The X-Parasites have been vanquished for good. Ravenbeak's plans have been thwarted. The last Metroid has prevailed. The galaxy is at peace. Regarding how the game itself operates, there is a lot to talk about. First and foremost, I want to talk about just how fluid the controls are. Metroid Dread was made in collaboration with Mercury Steam, the same people who made Metroid Samus Returns in 2017. The controls act very nicely, especially with the control sticks, allowing players to easily aim while running with no problem. Plus, I found it very easy to wall jump, a skill that requires some practice in the older games considering how you have a D-pad rather than a control stick. One of the biggest things I found Nintendo improved upon in this game was mobility, meaning that in Dread, Samus is more agile than ever before. One such example includes a brand new ability, sliding. By hitting left trigger while running, you can easily slide underneath small passageways and keep the momentum upon reaching the other end. This comes in very handy in earlier parts of the game before you obtain the Morph Ball ability. Better yet, once you do have the upgrade, you can slide a fair distance into longer tunnels before morphing, meaning you don't slow down unless you decide to go back out. What I found different, and quite frankly interesting in this game, is that the Morph Ball isn't one of the very first upgrades you acquire. That title goes to the Charge Beam. That being said, it felt a good kind of difference to not get such an iconic and useful ability right off the bat, which goes to show how the developers wanted to make this game different than its predecessors. Getting back on topic, another ability that was tweaked to allow for keeping your speed up while moving is the melee counter. Debuting in Metroid Samus Returns, the melee counter is an ability that allows players to parry an enemy attack before following up with a strong blast. In that game, however, you would stop dead in your tracks when pressing X to perform this move, thus preventing you from getting a world record speedrun. In Dread though, by pressing X while running, you perform the dash counter, which does the same thing as a stationary melee counter, but allows you to parry an enemy and keep moving while doing so. Better yet, it even slightly damages foes. Next, there is the Speed Booster, making a comeback since we last saw it 11 years ago in Metroid Other M. In Fusion, Zero Mission, and Other M, the speed boost would begin after running for a short distance regardless if it was needed or not. Sure, it lets you traverse long hallways faster, but the sound effects might be annoying to some. In Metroid Dread, you can actually activate it whenever you want by pressing the left stick to prepare the boost and then running in a certain direction for a bit. I found this mechanic to be handy as it allows you to use the speed booster whenever you see it fit as opposed to it activating automatically. To further add on to how Nintendo made mobility the focus of their controls, tilting downwards on the left stick while speed boosting allows Samus to save the energy from that boost for a Shine Spark without crouching, meaning that you don't have to uncrouch before moving to a desired position and then using the Shine Spark. Plus, it feels so damn awesome to use it with the sounds, visuals, and everything. One of the greatest things I found about the speed booster is that you can keep your speed up even after doing certain things that would result in you losing that velocity. For example, jumping across gaps and landing on the other side would cancel the speed booster's effects in other games, but Dread Speed Booster lets you keep running even after doing so, going so far as to even allow you to wall jump and not lose the momentum. Before I ramble on too much about agility in this game, I want to talk about the Flash Shift, a new Aeon ability that lets you teleport a set distance up to 3 consecutive times. This can be used for traversing terrain and dodging attacks, all while looking like a character out of Dragon Ball Z. It's pretty fun to use, and your suit's Aeon supply recharges very quickly after use. Speaking of Aeon, it works a little bit differently in this game than it did in Samus Returns. In Metroid Dread, using an Aeon ability completely drains your gauge, to which it automatically refills. When Aeon previously appeared in Metroid Samus Returns, using one of the 4 upgrades slowly drained your supply, and you could refill it by hitting successful melee counters and collecting large spheres of the energy. In Dread, parrying an enemy and defeating it yields a larger amount of health and ammunition instead of Aeon. As for other abilities, one I would like to talk about is the Varia Suit. It's an upgrade that allows Samus to safely traverse areas with extreme temperatures. However, in Metroid Dread, the Varia Suit is only able to protect you from extreme heat rather than both extreme hot and cold. I find it absurd why such an upgrade would be nerfed this way because it protects us just fine from cold temperatures in every other game. Now, it might be because of Samus' infusion with Metroid DNA that weakened the efficacy of the upgrade, but again, the Varia Suit infusion allowed us to explore Sub-Zero areas just fine. Moving on, this game sees the introduction of several new upgrades including the Spin Boost, which essentially gives you the ability to double jump. This upgrade allows you to explore certain areas until you acquire the Space Jump, which lets you somersault through the air endlessly as a form of flying. Oh, and speaking of jumping, you can actually jump in Morph Ball form by default as opposed to having to acquire the Spring Ball or get good at bomb jumping to have to do so. This is something I've always been critical of in Metroid games, so I'm glad that this ability is now default. The Diffusion Beam is an upgrade we've seen only once before in Metroid Other M, and it makes a comeback in this game. Basically, it spreads out the impact of your charge beam, so much so that it can hit enemies on a platform above you. You don't get the Wave Beam until late in this game like Metroid Fusion, so having this sort of power is handy, and when you get the Plasma Beam later on, this thing packs a wall up. Next we have Storm Missiles, also known as Seeker Missiles from when we last saw them in the Metroid Prime trilogy. I found this ability was honestly fun to use, as you can target up to 5 enemies and then hit them with 3 missiles per lock, meaning that you could fire up to a total of 15 super missiles at a single target if you desired. It does consume missile ammo quickly, so I recommend using it sparingly. It's a really good upgrade for keeping the pressure on your attackers in the case of the 2 Chozo robots you encounter in Ferenia. When people talk about environments in video games, they typically want the type that immerses you in the world of the game. Take games that I've played like Doom Eternal and Super Mario Odyssey, whose environments excel at that with their themes, music, and the details in the backgrounds. In the past, the worlds in the 2D Metroid saga had superb details and score for their era, but they still felt a bit linear and closed off. Despite being deep underground, Dread's environments feel much more open world than its predecessors, and the themes in each part of ZDR have their own soundtracks that really immerse you. Some of my favorite environments include the following. Dyron, a biological research facility with a very sci-fi-esque theme and lots of machinery in the background. Berenia, an aquatic laboratory that looks like the cloning facilities on Kamino from Star Wars on the surface, but underneath it feels unconfined, as in it feels like you're in the entire ocean with very few walls. Now, traditionally, Metroid games have had lovely music for their underwater environments, as in the type you can listen to while you study, Berenia's underwater theme keeps the tradition alive, and honestly sounds like something out of a Mario game. I'm particularly fond of the E.M.M.I zones, which all have the commonalities of an eerie grayscale color palette with a white glow in the background, and a quiet and almost unnerving ambience as you sneak around while listening carefully for the footsteps of the mechanical menace that's out for your blood. Another thing about environments that really caught my eye was the background activity. In many areas you could see wild animals reacting to you moving by, typically by running away. My favorite aspect of the environments out of all of them would have to be areas that have minimal light, such as areas of diorite and unused save rooms, map and network stations. In these areas, I love how the green lights of Samus' suit glow while the rest of her suit is hardly visible in the dark. These scenes honestly remind me of those silhouette levels in Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze. When it comes down to the bosses, I noticed that Nintendo significantly upped the ante with them. Those of you who watched my Let's Play series would know that I died a few times to a lot of the bosses. Then again, that might be because I am ass at dodging. When fighting a boss, they do a lot more damage than in other games, thus prioritizing the use of dodging and countering where appropriate. As annoying as it was for me, it creates a challenging experience for newer players that requires skill and wit to win. Again, not to sound like David Jafts or anything, but after all the Let's Plays I've done on Metroid, you'd think I'd have died less. Yet despite this, Samus clearly shows that she doesn't screw around either. I like the direction that Nintendo took with her character, and their efforts had a much better result than in Metroid Other M. Dread has several moments that shows Samus as the type of character she is, a fearless warrior who gets the job done. You know, the kind of moments that make you say, Zero Suit, more like... As awesome as it was seeing Samus go berserk on Ravenbeak, I'll admit, it put the fear of God in me to see her in such a state of primal rage. Guess you could say this is what happens when the Doom soundtrack hits. Jokes aside, I felt this was very fitting for Samus because of everything she endured. Between her battles with the Metroids in X, watching the baby and Adam die, and the screwed up family reunion with Ravenbeak, it felt only fair that she finally hit her breaking point and snapped. I find that Metroid Dread has a very interesting duality. What I mean is that there are some moments where you feel like an unstoppable force, and moments where you're helpless to do anything other than run away. And it's this dichotomy of dread and being dread that leads me on to my next topic, the E.M.M.I robots. But first, let's just see how my friend is doing.
Someone help get me out of here! These robots are complete psychopaths! Oh, hi there. That's it!
As previously mentioned, the Extraplanetary Multiform Mobile Identifiers, or E.M.M.I for short, are a team of 7 research robots sent to ZDR to search for the X-Parasite, only for them to wind up as pawns in Ravenbeak's plan. In the prologue, it states that they are incredibly agile and that their armor is made of the strongest stuff in the universe, meaning that no matter how many of your abilities you recover, nothing can so much as scratch their paint. The E.M.M.I create fear in many ways. Whenever you're in one of the E.M.M.I zones, there is no background music, just an ominous, quiet ambience in a dark, confined area, so you have to listen very carefully for the sounds of its footsteps. Unfortunately, the E.M.M.I are also capable of hearing you. When it picks up the sound Samus makes, most commonly by running, it will immediately begin traveling towards the source. At this point, your best bet is to either run away or use the Phantom Cloak, as it renders you completely invisible and silent as long as you don't run out of Aeon. Bad news is, it significantly slows your movements. On the other hand, if an E.M.M.I sees you, it will enter what is known as Pursuit Mode, during which time the background music becomes tense and fast-paced as it chases you at high speed. The Phantom Cloak won't save you then, meaning your only hope for survival is to run. If you're lucky, you'll run fast and far enough to get the E.M.M.I to exit Pursuit Mode, but it will still be attracted to the sounds you make and will continue to pathfind to the source. And if you get caught, your odds of survival are about 1 in 100 according to Adam. When captured by an E.M.M.I, an interactive cutscene will play showing the E.M.M.I grabbing Samus before it opens its faceplate and giving Samus a death that looks like something out of a Resident Evil game by impaling her with its face needle. It's pretty rough. When an E.M.M.I grabs and impales Samus, there is a quick red flash for each of the 2 actions, signaling that they can be parried. The bad news is the timing is very difficult for players to gauge, despite having 2 opportunities to escape instant death. The window of opportunity is a fraction of a second long and it will never open at one consistent point, so the moment to escape its clutches with the right timing can be anywhere between a few seconds and immediately upon opening its faceplate. This random timing further decreases your odds of survival, and frankly is an excellent idea by the devs, because if the flashes were set to occur at very specific points, then the encounters wouldn't be as tense as they are in the final product. Hit the X button too early and you'll harmlessly bonk the E.M.M.I before it grabs or kills you. Hit it too late, and I'm sure you can guess what happens. If you do manage to hit X at just the right time at either one of the two windows, you'll perform a melee counter that will stun the E.M.M.I for a few seconds, giving you some much needed time to get the hell away from it. Each E.M.M.I can only roam within a specific zone, demarcated on your map with a line and the locations of the doors that separate the outside world from them. So while you're totally safe when outside of the zone, the doors to the outside world will lock if an enemy is in pursuit mode, meaning that you're totally trapped in there until you can get it off your tail, at which point the doors will unseal and allow you to escape. I like this whole mechanic as it forces you to make not getting seen your priority if you want a quick escape. However, could you imagine how scary the game would be if the E.M.M.I could appear in areas outside of each zone? That would be truly intense, as you never know just when one might appear. If you know horror movies, the monster becomes less and less scary the more the protagonists know about it. This is somewhat relevant for Dread. Problem is, each E.M.M.I is unique in its abilities. All units possess the common abilities of being able to crawl on ceilings and contort their bodies to fit into small passageways. Look, I know they're robots, but it's goddamn creepy to see this shit right here. Ugh. Each E.M.M.I also possesses the ability to alter their functionality, thus giving them unique abilities that pose a threat to you in different ways. This includes super speed, freezing targets in solid ice, being able to see through walls and stun you with an electric shot, and whatever the hell this is. I thought the E.M.M.I were four-legged rovers, not walking nuclear bombs. So even if you escape one monster in one part of ZDR, another variant of it is waiting for you. This happens to be one of my favorite things about the E.M.M.I because it's not just one consistent threat with the same abilities each time, but rather a unique and intense experience for each unit you encounter during your trek to the surface. Now, what if I told you, despite the E.M.M.I being invincible, there is a way to destroy them? In each and every E.M.M.I zone, there is a central unit that controls the robot. Getting to each central unit takes a while, but the boss fight for each is very simple as it just floats in the air while a couple turrets shoot at you. Upon defeating a central unit, Samus absorbs a unique type of energy from its body, transforming her arm cannon into the Omega Cannon. Might I add that this looks totally badass and is a nice deviation from her regular arm cannon, which is always dark green. Absorbing this energy will also let the E.M.M.I know your exact location and will chase you down regardless of how far you run. So this is the point where you now have to face the big scary monster head on in order for you to be able to escape. With the Omega Cannon, you have two new powers at your disposal that you have to use to put the E.M.M.I down, the Omega Stream and the Omega Blaster. When pressing the left bumper to aim with the Omega Cannon, the camera pans to a nice over-the-shoulder view, which is a cool deviation from how the camera normally is. You're going to want to put a good amount of distance between you and the E.M.M.I before using either function, as it takes a few moments for them to do their thing. First, you use the Omega Stream to fire a rapid-fire volley of energy blasts at the E.M.M.I's faceplate until it overheats and breaks. The Omega Stream reminds me of Hyper Mode in Metroid Prime 3, where you can fire a stream of energy by charging your Phazon Beam, so Prime fans ought to get a nostalgia trip with this. Once the faceplate is shattered, the E.M.M.I's core is exposed, and then you'll use the Omega Blaster to finish the job. This ability will only work at full charge, so you have to start charging it while aiming for the eye and then letting her rip once you have a clean shot. Then, and only then, will you have survived, as doing so will destroy the relentless and previously invincible foe. Defeating an E.M.M.I will also deplete the Omega Cannon's energy, returning your arm cannon to a normal state. On the bright side, your triumph will reward you with a new ability that correlates to that which the E.M.M.I used to hunt you down. Defeating the yellow one, which I referred to as Reverse Flash, will give you the speed booster, the blue one gives you ice missiles, and so on. To wrap up my thoughts on the E.M.M.I, I think the devs did an outstanding job creating a scary, relentless foe to emphasize the game's title, Dread. The E.M.M.I are certainly more terrifying than the SAX in Metroid Fusion, as it was only one consistent threat with god-awful pathfinding AI. The atmosphere within its territory, its ingenious AI and abilities, and the narrow chances of survival upon capture make an encounter with these mechanical menaces a truly intense and heart-pounding experience. Among other things I was excited for while waiting for Metroid Dread to release, the wait was most certainly worth it for the E.M.M.Is and the terror they brought with them. So, what do I think about Metroid Dread after discussing my thoughts and opinions on it? Well, despite its flaws, I freaking loved it! Between the amazing finale to a long saga, the incredible gameplay with its environment, and the nerve-wracking encounters with the E.M.M.I, it's no wonder Metroid Dread was nominated for Game of the Year in 2021. But let's not forget that it actually won the award for Best Action Adventure Game. In spite of the flaws in the story and Ravenbeak's motives, the finale to one of gaming's oldest stories was one of shock, action, and terror with each new turn. And I especially love how Nintendo successfully fixed Samus's character after the screw-ups made in Metroid Other M, making it known once more that she is their equivalent of Doom Guy. Also, by unlocking all Chozo archives and ending rewards, you are rewarded with a special artwork of Samus and all of her allies and foes throughout the arc. This and the other ending rewards that reflect all of the games in the story, including Metroid Other M, surprisingly enough, serve as a sort of love letter to the series. The feeling of nostalgia I got after witnessing these rewards was lovely, as they all led up to what happens in Dread. Even though this is canonically Samus Aran's final adventure, this by no means says that this is the end of the franchise. We've still got Metroid Prime 4 to look forward to and whatever other games Nintendo decides to send down the line. However, like I said earlier, future games would have to take place before Dread because, again, it wouldn't make any sense for anything to happen now that the main story is over. But as long as people like myself have such an incredible passion for this series, the fun will hopefully never end. That being said, I give Metroid Dread a solid 9.6 out of 10. This is hands down the best gaming experience I've ever had. Now before I end the video, I'd like to give a few shoutouts to some cool people who helped out with this video. First up, Jasmine. I'm sure you're all familiar with her by now as she's a close friend of mine. Her and I are working together on Analyst, a Meta Runner story by Approach Vector Studios, as well as some other projects that I sadly cannot speak of at this time. She's even mentioned me in some of her videos too, one of which shows me locked in her basement for selling her cringy old artwork, so it felt good to get some revenge at long last. It's also worth noting that Jasmine recently opened up a Patreon to fund her original animated series, Silvercrest, so please check it out and consider supporting her, link in the description. Next, I would like to thank my friend Dill, who was kind enough to help with the glitching effects you saw in this video. He's another coworker of mine from AVS, and I happen to have a big inside joke with him and my other friend, Twain. Twain made the artwork you saw in the thumbnails of my Let's Play series. This would have been implemented sooner, however, several unforeseen delays prevented me from doing so. It's amazing nonetheless, and she certainly deserves some love from you guys. So, that's going to bring an end to my review of Metroid Dread. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing, commenting, liking, and ringing that notification bell for future videos. I have a few fun ideas for videos in the near future. Until then, I'm Hadfield15. Space out, bros and brositas. Wait, she's alive? Oh, this is going to be good. Hey, Jazz. How was your trip to ZDR?
When I get my hands on you, I'll rip your heart out, even if it means biting your damn face!
Oh, God.